welcome to the stage Catherine Gibbs, Head of Sponsorship for AIA, Kunihito Morimora, President and CEO, Dentsu Sports Asia, and Mark Davis, Senior Sponsorship Manager, Standard Chartered Bank. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, successful sports sponsorships are based on a deep understanding of a brand's audience and objectives. Mark, perhaps you could kick off and tell us a little bit about the sponsorships your brands are involved in and the role that you're playing as well.
Yeah, sure. Standard Chartered has 3 tiers of sponsorship. We have our global platform, which is Liverpool Football Club. We then have local linked sponsorships, which is our marathon series across 14 markets. And then we have roughly 150 smaller local sponsorships. I think the key to these sponsorships is understanding the objectives that each of these offers. And we have completely separate guidelines on usage and what these sponsorships are trying to achieve. And so for Liverpool, this is all about global brand awareness, and it works in the markets where we have a small market share, as we don't have advertising budgets, and it provides us a huge platform to leverage off. In markets where we have large brand awareness and large consumer base, we focus on providing the assets the sponsorship provides to our customers and to actually drive business rather than brand awareness.
And Catherine, I mean, you've been at AIA for 6 months now, did you say? And yours is a new role.
Yes.
In the company.
So AIA does sponsor primarily, I suppose, music and now football. And earlier this year, we announced a 5-year partnership with Tottenham Hotspur. So to service that rather comprehensive investment, they created the role for me to come in and help manage that with the markets. So really what we try to achieve with this sponsorship and also with the music is it's not really about brand awareness for us. In a lot of our markets, we have up to 100% awareness already. It's more an opportunity for us to be more deeply engaged in people's lives. So that's the sort of overarching objective behind what we're trying to achieve with these platforms.
Great. And Kuni, I mean, Dentsu has a commitment to sports, as we know, and is heavily involved both in Japan and outside. So tell us a little bit about your role.
Actually, Dentsu is a company of advertising agency, so I am the part of a sports arm of Dentsu. Of course, Dentsu is agencies. We have 30 billion turnover business, but sports is one of the very important division. And of course, the Dentsu last 50 years, since 1964 Tokyo Summer Olympic Games, Dentsu heavily involved for sports marketing. And of course, Dentsu after 2002 FIFA World Cup Japan Korea, Dentsu start to expand their footprint to the global stage. Of course, Dentsu historically we had a joint venture with ISL. A lot of joint venture company we have done through, and of course, Dentsu perceived before a more Japanese company, and also looking after Japanese brands. But now is the more expanding more globally. Especially we see the Asia as a very upcoming market. Also, our brands, a lot of brands want to associate more and more in sports. And a lot of Japanese companies, as you can see, engaging in sports marketing. And they know how to utilize the sports. And a lot of requests coming from a sponsor, they want to do more in Asia. So therefore, I decided to move to Singapore 2010 to start up with the company called Dentsu Sports Asia to look after sports marketing in Asia, Middle East, and Africa, and Oceania region. So mainly for us, we do pretty much a one-stop service to the clients. So we don't limit ourselves not only sponsorship or TV, but also we do PR, player endorsement, creative marketing research. Pretty much what we do is we try to provide a 360-degree service to the clients.
And Mark, what are some of the challenges that you face in your role with some of the global sponsorships that you've got? I know we've talked about compliance as an issue for international companies.
Yeah, particularly in the financial sector. I would say this has jumped up in the last year and a half, particularly at Standard Chartered. Some of our closest colleagues are now in compliance and legal, and it's quite interesting looking at the structure of the assets that we have with the Liverpool deal, for example. We're unable to use some of the money can't buy experiences at the moment because the perceived value of that item is too much. And so we're changing from using those assets in a corporate environment through to our retail products, where increasingly we can still use these in markets where you can have lucky draws, but even there the regulators are sort of putting a no-no on those lucky draws. So it would be interesting to see during renegotiations with the club what assets we're looking to use, and I think that would have changed dramatically in the last couple of years.
And does that vary by local markets in Asia?
Yeah, it varies hugely. In certain markets, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, where we have a large presence and Liverpool is popular, fortunately we can still do a lot of activations through co-branded products and rewarding our top customers. But in other markets, Hong Kong, Singapore, it's becoming increasingly difficult to utilize those assets. But fortunately for the bank, the main objective of the Liverpool sponsorship was brand awareness, so we've got a quick win there with them starting to win some games.
I mean, at AIA, we have a similar issue to a degree with compliance, because in Australia, for example, a lot of our products are sold through independent financial advisors, so heavy compliance issues there. And also we have a bank assurance partnership with Citi. So similar case, you know, we have all these great assets to use which we can't actually give the full experience to these certain people. So what we do is we try to just be a little bit more creative and repackage things. So for example, we sell, or we don't sell, we run campaigns for our bank assurance partners which don't directly give them the final benefit, but it's an extension benefit that they can pass through to their children or their friends or their family or whomever. And that's just one of the ways that we get around it. But it varies market to market, but it is an issue that exists.
For my point of view, of course, I'm from the agency side. So apart from the compliance, maybe two things I'd like to address is one is of course, Asia has a lot of different backgrounds. Also, very difficult to deliver sometimes. Some sponsors are looking to sponsorship through more exposure. Some sponsors are looking to expose more their brand through the sponsorship. But some sponsors say, no, exposure is enough, so they really want to see how to link to the sales, to increase their sales. So each market, each sponsor has a different agenda. So this is try to customize to fit their needs. This is something very challenging because all the sponsors have a different problem, to be resolved. So, and also the sponsorship is very difficult sometimes to measure. So, of course, if some brand says only exposure, it's a bit easier. A lot of exposure they can put on the ground, signage or advertisements, but that tangible benefit. But intangible benefits sometimes quite challenging. How to measure, or how to justify their investment. And also another challenge, especially in Asia, is the working with the developing countries like Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Timor-Leste. I have done last 3 years working to the countries, also governments. Last year, SEA Games, Southeast Asian Games, Dentsu Sports Asia appointed as an exclusive marketing partner. But it's really, really challenging for us, to get into the Myanmar market. And Myanmar was the first time to host the SEA Games since last 60 years they didn't host. So this took so much time because of the dealing with the government. Especially, they don't have enough knowledge about how to utilize. Also, the government is is not mature. So educational period also had a lot of time to spend, contract. So this is something, the challenge. Some countries very understanding the value of the sponsorship, but some countries like emerging countries sometimes very facing the challenge to deliver all the rights and benefit.
And is sports sponsorship an effective way to enter a new market, such as Myanmar that you're talking about?
I think so, because of those countries, not much entertainment or contents available. So therefore, sports always unify the country, and sports always people follow. So therefore, I think sports always believes good tool to enter the market. At least the brands is very looking to invest more and more to sports and a little bit entertainment, because of they understand the value of the power. Also, those countries, sports is very good to start with something, especially for the TV coverage. Also, if major properties is very people pay attention to.
Well, you touched on measurement, and I definitely want to come back to that because that's a concern for all marketers. Mark, I'd like to ask you, what are the challenges around local versus global? So global programs and activating them in the local markets here in Asia?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One thing I do want to highlight is that we're all sponsoring these teams because we are trying to tap into a passion point of the audience out there. So it's off to quite a negative start, but I think the way we've sort of succeeded with that is by actually bringing the experience, the money can't buy items, closer to the people in these markets. So be it through soccer clinics on the ground, bringing in past players. It's basically, as a brand, we can connect the passion point with the fans, and that's something that we're doing through some of our programs. And in terms of that last question, it's a global property. The markets didn't ask for us to sponsor Liverpool. We're doing it for brand awareness. So the way that we've tackled this is by combining the assets together and performing packages, which we can then sell into the market. So one of those is a five-a-side football tournament that we call the Standard Chartered Trophy. It's essentially a futsal tournament across 14 markets. You can activate this through corporate clients that are private invite events only, or sign up to a credit card and it's open to the mass public. But it's up to the local market to decide how this is done. They get the finals experience, which is a 4-day trip to the UK, playing on Anfield, watching the final game of the season. But any activation locally needs to be covered by themselves, but we will provide support and sort of media packs and all the infrastructure they need to run those. So that works quite well for us. So globally funded finals with a local implementation.
And Catherine, what about at AIA, going from regional to local and keeping that consistency?
I mean, Mark, we have very similar situations. Our organisation model is decentralised, so we actually empower the local markets to manage all of their marketing programs. So similarly with Tottenham Hotspur, again, the relationship with the Spurs themselves and the commercial partner sits at group with me. But in terms of activating around the markets, it's driven both from a creative concept point of view, but also budgets at the local level. Now, I think this approach works. I think it's really important that the local markets are empowered because they know their market better. They know what the customer preferences are, the fan preferences are. We provide the assets and they pick and choose as to what they use. Having said that, I think also to ensure that you're supporting key messages and consistent messages for your brand, it's important to keep some sort of guidance and steer from a centralised point of view, which is what we've also done in terms of identifying communication toolkits, certain key milestone activities that we know are coming up in the 5-year partnership, which we drive from a creative point of view. And of course, we adapt locally with the markets, but essentially it is empowered to them. But I think a bit of a mix of central and local has worked well for us.
Great, and let's talk about measurement and establishing KPIs to measure the success of a sponsorship investment. Mark, can you tell us about your experience and what works, what doesn't work? What advice would you have?
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of any sponsorship, you need to set clear objectives at the start and make sure that you constantly refer to those over the lifetime of the sponsorship. I think a lot of companies will put these in place for the first year, and it's really important to actually go back to those and assess how you're doing against those and constantly communicate with the business, because at big organizations at senior level, lots of people will be talking. Some will have very strong opinions on whether a marketing investment of that size is appropriate. But I think you need to continue communicating to your internal stakeholders so they are aware of what the sponsorship is achieving and what it can achieve for the businesses. And if the business model changes, then you should adapt your sponsorship platforms accordingly rather than a one-size-fits-all approach.
Catherine, do you have any?
I mean, little to add to that, really. I think that's spot on. Clearly, being able to measure brand is quite straightforward, particularly when you've got good agencies that support doing that, monitoring and measuring. And these days, with all the technology, they do. So I think that's quite straightforward. Where it gets a little more difficult to measure is the direct business generation that comes from a sponsorship, because there's so many intangible pieces to hosting customers, hosting clients. It's all so experiential. How do you measure that? So that's always vague. And if there's anyone in the room who's ever found the perfect science to that, please do approach me afterwards. But
Kuni, that's your...
For agency point of view, always this is a quite tough challenge to us, especially nowadays. A lot of the companies, for instance, Japanese companies, they don't care too much about brand awareness because of most of the companies are well known already. And then sponsorship, like I just finished a World Cup this year, Brazil. Sony is a global, the FIFA World Cup sponsor. Versus Olympics. We broke out Panasonic and Bridgestone for the IOC global sponsors. FIFA World Cup sponsorship will be easier because the sponsor can gain brandings and the tickets and etc. But Olympics is always a tough one. Usage of 5 rings and a designation and ticket. That's all. So how to justify? There's no branding on the pitch. So always we try to resolve tangible and intangible benefit. Tangible is always branding, but intangible benefit, how to measure? This is always a challenge. I don't have any answer, but of course, whenever I propose to the clients, some clients doesn't care to measure for the intangible benefit. But also, I'm saying that if you don't take your competitor to take the property, so if I don't have a clear answer about how to measure the properties, I always say your competitor, big rival, will be take the properties, because property is very limited. Also, very good property, the premium properties is always very competing each other. So therefore, this is always a challenge. But intangible benefits, sometimes we measure that sponsors very appreciate internally. For instance, if you're a sponsor for the World Cup, your employee is very, very happy. So brand loyalty will be raised. Also recruitment, sometimes recruitment, and it helps a lot. So again, this is Asian people is more like moved by emotion, So emotion is pretty much difficult to justify, also measure. But this is still, I don't have a clear answer. But so far, sports still there. So a lot of sponsorship is still investing. So that means, still, even though I don't have an answer, the money is still there. So which is I think this is, I have to, in some point, need to clear, answer.
It's still there, but we heard this morning that it only accounts for 3% of sponsorship dollars. What will it take for that to grow? For brands to have more confidence?
I think it's a really difficult sort of question for the whole industry. As a bank, we've tried to really break down the numbers with our marketing teams, our analytics teams, and using external agencies. I think the one sort of key learning we had is make sure you've got your your go-to data in terms of awareness. If you have that and it's robust, you can use that with confidence. That helps. And then to actually invest in decent sample sizes for awareness surveys, and that's where you're getting more feedback from the markets. And it is a serious investment, especially with tight activation budgets, but without that data, it's quite hard to defend how the sponsorship is doing. And I think for all the agencies out there, even the internal sponsorship guys, they're selling the whole time as well internally to the businesses, to the boards. And yeah, as an industry, I think we need to be sort of all singing off the same song sheet here and get that robust data, because it impacts the whole industry.
And are we doing that at the moment, Catherine? Are we all singing from the same sheet?
Well, to be frank, I don't know. It's difficult because we're at such an evolutionary stage, I think, in this marketplace in terms of being mature in the world of sports sponsorship. So whilst we have the big, robust international brands that are getting behind properties, in terms of, if you look at what we were all doing 5 years ago, even as early as 5 years ago, the maturity of how we were approaching sports sponsorship compared to, North America or in Europe was very different. But it's certainly and quite rapidly improved. And I think there's a lot of very good best practices out there now that people are sitting up and watching. And of course, given the fact that a lot of the budgets are sitting, the sponsorship spend sits in this market, can only, and it's not fully being tapped into, that's got to change, and it's got to change pretty quickly. So hopefully, I think, yeah.
Kuni, can you share with us a success story?
I think there's a lot of opportunity. Also, before sponsoring something, of course, our approach is always the activation is very key. So if you spend $100 for the sponsorship, you need to have another $100 for the activation. So this is very key. So we try to, as an agency, we don't just sell the rights. We sit down with the clients, just conceptualize, also strategize, what the clients want and what to achieve. So this is very important because of why the sponsor doing the sponsorship. This is we have to have a clear answer before they get into the sponsorship. And also we see that relationship with the clients is a quite long relationship we aim at, not like a one-off, So all our sponsorship so far, the global sponsorship is quite long, more than 10 years contract, and also sometimes do longer. So because we don't want to just sell the rights and just one off, so we really need to spend more time. Activation is a key. For instance, if you have a Ferrari, if you buy a Ferrari, but if you don't have money to buy the gas, there's no point to put in the car in the garage, garage. So therefore, you really need to have activation and also sponsorship 1-to-1, something like that. So this is activation is a key to success of the sponsorship. And as you see, a lot of the sponsors in Asia, not many Asian brands, involve sponsorship. Purely people, a lot of Asian companies doesn't know how to utilize. And the sponsorship is not cheap. So therefore, I think we take more time to make the brands understand the power of sports and how to utilize the sponsorship. That's I think that's the key. Sponsorship, also the activation. That's I think is very key to success.
And I think for this region, you see a lot of brands investing in the US and in Europe. There needs to be investment in the infrastructure and the platforms that are being provided here to make that shift change. If we're going to get up above that 3%, that definitely needs to happen shortly, because all the investment is being placed in other sectors around the globe.
And how are you, just to talk quickly about partnerships as well, how are your partnerships changing or evolving as your sponsorships are maturing as well? Partnerships with agencies, with broadcasters?
Well, I'll talk about the partnership more with our property, the rights holder. I think, you looked at sort of contracts 5-10 years ago, and they were almost like carbon copy templates. No matter what property it was that you were sponsoring, it was what you got in the stadium and what you got on here on branding. And there was very little of these sort of more experiential pieces and the access to artists or the footballers or whomever it was. And I think that now in this changing landscape, particularly with the rapid onset of social media and this huge need for content marketing pieces, it's become more and more important to work with the rights holder to switch perhaps the weighting around in those contracts and in terms of the suite of assets that you have. That's the first thing, and I think the second thing is to be really careful about the partner that you choose to be with, because a contract's a contract, but if at the end of the day you start to try and activate and the partner's not there to really support you and provide those resources, it's a very difficult process, an activation piece. And we've been really fortunate because Tottenham Hotspur are incredible to work with, and I think that works because we entered into this with a very, very clear shared vision of what we wanted to have achieved, and there was obviously mutual benefits on both sides that were very clear too. So we've been very fortunate on that, but I think that that's really critical in terms of partnerships and how we're evolving as an industry as well, and as in sports sponsorship.
Mark, from your perspective?
Yeah, the hindsight would have been with Liverpool, for example, would have been to share more with them up front, so they've understood our business. I mean, banking is quite complex, it's hugely different in the markets we operate, but the more we've shared with them, the better they've understood, and they haven't become an agency. Yes, we haven't had a huge activation budget, so we haven't had activation agencies the whole time, but they've really stepped up in the recent years. Funnily enough, around renegotiation times, they're incredibly helpful, but yeah, I think sharing information, and cliche as it is, a partnership is the best way forward, and working together on activations, and to an extent with other partners, if they've got common goals, that helps as well, because the activation budgets aren't getting any bigger at our place, so sharing that with our partners helps.
I think that traditional sponsorship is a one-way. This is a rights and benefits, you buy or not. This is a one-way relationship. But now sponsors are learning a lot, so the brand is more two-way communication. So they are aiming for. So interactive communication, also as engagement is very important. And also, Dentsu's point of view is that we are also seller, also buyer. So we are pretty much a very unique position. So we always look into the rights holder who has more flexibility, because of some rights and benefits is very important. How much have a flexibility, and also the engagement and two-way communication is very important. So we don't sell only the tickets or A-board only, but how much flexibility has and how much interactive the partnership we can provide to the clients. That's I think key to success.
Catherine, what advice do you have for brands looking to accelerate investment in this area?
I mean, I think everything that we've really discussed. I think if you're starting to consider that you want to get into a sports sponsorship, be very, very clear and go through that due diligence to make sure that you've set very, very clear objectives, that can be articulated quite easily too. Because ultimately, and this is not rocket science to anyone, but they will guide you across the whole piece of your sponsorship, even back down to the measurement and being able to report back to the board, and etc. But it's about having a really clear set of objectives, and it is about finding the right partner to work with, because they might have a fabulous property, but if you can't work with them or they're not going to support you, then it's not going to work. And then the third thing is make sure that you do have the budgets to support what you're going to do, because the Ferrari and the gas example, there's no point in investing so much as one does in sports sponsorship particularly, and then not having the funds to support that. And back to our model of empowering markets, making sure that through that process you're engaging with them too, so that they are aware that they need budgets to support it, but also that you're sharing the conversation with them. So you're making sure that as you negotiate rights and benefits, as much as possible, everyone's looked after.
Great. Well, thank you. That's all that we've got time for today. But thank you very much for joining us and for your comments. Great.